I'm Zuber-Skerritt, the producer of a series of video programs on postgraduate research, supervision and training. This video series has been produced simply from recordings of a residential staff development program on postgraduate supervision for women held at the Twin Waters Resort on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland in April 1992. The aim of this series is to provide supervisors and postgraduate students with resources to understand and improve postgraduate studies in their department or institution.
What I'd like to firstly do is to just raise a couple of questions of why have a session on introduction into the research application culture when the theme is postgraduate supervision of women. And I think it's a very important question to ask, because doing research and doing research for the ARC is very hard work and it's competitive work. And fewer women apply, and we're only now beginning to consider the statistics as to whether the success rate by gender is a problem, not only in terms of the applicants and their success rate, but the gender of the assessors. And in fact, one of the most interesting bits of data which will soon surface, we hope, is an analysis of the success rate of female applicants and those who were assessed by male assessors or female assessors in their fields. But unlike Ingrid, I can't give you any output on that yet, but that's being addressed. I think the encouraging thing to say, but I think it would be foolish to pretend that the world in the ARC is not hard and not competitive, is that last year, a third of the applications were from first-timers. And I think that's very, very encouraging, because there's a mythology that you have to be in the old boys network and that you have to be a professor and you have to be well known by the network to be successful. But last year, 1/3 of the successful grantees were first-timers. So I think it's worth having a go. Now, why is it worthwhile getting into this research culture and this research application culture when I've said it's hard and it's very competitive? And so the reasons that I can give may not be convincing, but I think that they're worth considering. I think the first reason for trying to get into the research application culture is intrinsic satisfaction. I really think if you do research, that the main reason to do it is because you have some curiosity about some question or some issue that you really want to find out about. I think doing research for research's sake, or because your head of department is pushing you to do it or whatever, is not necessarily the best reason, even though it may be a reality of life. So I'd still want to argue that the importance of doing research rests very much in terms of intellectual curiosity, challenge, discovery, inquiry, all those good, warm, fuzzy concepts. The second reason I think that it's terribly important that women get into this research application culture is that it's really a very important part of professional socialization. In that we have responsibility for postgraduate training and induction of the next generation, then I think we have to really take our contribution to that role seriously. We have to contribute to knowledge as part of what that means to work in higher education. We can't just be users of knowledge and transmitters of knowledge. And I think we really have to consider that motivation quite carefully. I also think that because we work in higher education and universities, we really are the major institution that's funded to contribute to existing knowledge and to create new knowledges, to critique it, and to reinterpret it. And I think because we have that particular responsibility, then I think we have to address it, because although the critique and the reinterpretation isn't funded as much as some of the science and technology areas, I do think that as a culture we have to protect that possibility, and therefore I think women have to be particularly active in those disciplines which are centred on critique and reinterpretation of knowledge. And the fourth reason I think that it's important to get into the research application culture relates to resources. At the moment, research infrastructure in universities is based on success in external competitive grants in 30 plus schemes, of which the ARC is one of those schemes. So that if you want your university to have good library resources, good computer resources, good laboratory space and so on, you really have to be part of that treadmill of being successful in getting external grants so that there's money not only to support library and those other things, but to distribute as small grants to help other people get into the research culture. What I thought I would do in this session is I'd like to discuss the criteria used by the ARC currently in judging the quality of a research application. Firstly, there are really two basic things that the panels who judge whether you're going to get funded or not consider. They consider the quality of the research itself, and they consider the quality of the proposal. And in terms of our last discussion about editing and getting assistance and help, I think it's perfectly legitimate to seek help on part 2, but I think you have to have a fair bit of input into part 1 to really stand up to the grilling of if you're interviewed. Now, the quality of the research itself is usually judged in terms of a number of criteria that are specified on the assessor's forms, which actually come in the package that you get when you decide to apply for an ARC grant. And the thing that is most important is the originality of your proposal. There is no way that in a highly competitive scheme, where in the 4 years I've been on the committee, the success rate has gone down from 35% to 29 to 26, and this year it's rumoured to be 18% success rate. There is no way that you're going to be funded for something that's been done before. It has to be original, has to be creative, has to feel novel, it can't feel stale. And believe me, when you start reading pages 1 and 2, you almost know immediately whether you're going to fund something or not. It's very interesting. Now, to get something to that stage, really, I would want to argue, is a long-term process. I know we've all heard stories of people who've written their application overnight and burnt them, but that may be so. They were probably thinking about it for quite a while. And to really work up a good proposal takes a fair lead-in time. And it's too late to do anything just in, say, February for March, and that's where I think mentoring is terribly important. But I think you really do need assistance if you're a young or a recent PhD or to start to get into designing a research proposal. I usually advise people not to apply for ARC or external grants if they haven't finished their PhD. I think you should concentrate on getting your credential and getting that out of the way, so to speak, before you start getting into this game. But that's a matter of taste and preference. One of the things that people don't realise often is that a lot of non-specialists will read what they've written. You nominate assessors who are close to the area. We choose assessors who are close to the area to send out your application to. But when it comes to the bloodbath of who gets funded and who doesn't, you have to convince the members of the panel that this application in psychology is better than this application in economics when they both got the grade of 5.9. So you've got to consider that when you're writing your proposal, while you're writing for a specialist audience, you're also writing for a generalist audience. And that's extremely difficult to do that. Think, is it well expressed, the ideas of what they're going to do and how they're going to go about it? So often proposals are bombed because members of the panel sit back and say, what the heck are they going to do? And if you've got to weave your way through and you can't work out what they're going to do and you interview them and you're still not clear they know what they're going to do or how they're going to do it and so on, there's no way in this current competitive climate that you'll get up. Now, this is where I think you should use your experienced researchers and grants officers to help you sharpen up your ideas and to help set out a proposal which communicates your ideas to the specialised assessors, but to the members of the granting body concerned. So there's quite an art in doing that. I've mentioned that the number one thing is the actual shape of the project itself in terms of its potential to contribute to new knowledge. If it hasn't got some originality, if it's not going to contribute to new knowledge, don't try the ARC. That is not the funding body for you. The second important aspect is the research design and the research plan coherent? And is there a reasonable rationale for what the person's going to do? So not only do you have to say what you're going to do, you have to say why you're going to do it. And you have to say what other people have done and why what you're doing is different. We have an old joke that we retell in the ARC with some pain, because we realised that we would not have funded Christopher Columbus's proposal to set off for America. And we realised we wouldn't have funded it because when he set out, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. When he got back, he didn't know where he'd been. And somebody else had paid for it. So there's no way that you're going to be paid for a major paradigmatic shift or change or great revolutionary idea. It's an incremental knowledge culture of adding to what's there. And you've got to show the structure of your contribution to that body of knowledge, which is always problematic. The third thing that committee members really like, and now they almost demand it, it used to be semi-optional, and when I started out I used to just naively put, has the project begun? Have you done any work on this before? And I would say no. But of course that's not what they want you to say. They want you to say you've been working on it, that you've piloted the ideas, that you've thought about it, that you've done all sorts of little things. They want to know that you've got some work in progress and so on. So if you haven't, forget it, because we're not going to fund you to start doing something. You've got to be part way down the track or we don't want to know about it. Now, the next one is another one that young people or newcomers come unstuck on. And assessors are often quite ruthless. They say nasty things like, why on earth does this person want to take 3 years to do this? This project could be done in 18 months. Cut the budget back and interview them in the feasibility. Is it possible to do it within the time and resources sought? Some people ask for too many resources in terms of the size of the problem. Others, of course, want to do everything in 3 years, which isn't possible. Just as we were talking about a PhD proposal being of a contained size, a master's proposal of a contained size, an honours thesis of a contained size, so too if you're asking for funding for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, then you've got to make sure your project and your timeline and your budgeting matches the shape of a 1 year proposal, a 2 year proposal or a 3. And the other thing they ask, is anything likely to come of it? Is an outcome likely? And this is the latest bureaucratic fixation. What was the outcome of the previous funding? What is going to come out of this project? And unless there's an outcome at the moment, because we're very outcomes oriented, then it's a problem. Number 5, we've probably talked about a lot in terms of the last day and a half, the presentation, the readability, and whether it's readable, whether it's too laden with jargon. Assessors don't like stuff to be too laden with jargon. You've got to use the appropriate terminology of the field, but you don't overuse the jargon. You've got to remember your two audiences, and your methodology has to be very clearly specified. You can't just sort of say, oh, I'm going to do case studies and then I'll do content analysis. That is not adequate. You have to spell out quite carefully what type of case study methodology you're going to use and based on what set of prior work and what sort of content analysis, what classification scheme you're going to have or try to develop from that. And if you can't write for two audiences at the one time, that we now give you the opportunity to do a 6-line non-technical summary to say what you're doing. And we read that non-technical summary a lot. The 6th one is something that again, Ingrid said, I think we don't ever know how to define quality, but we certainly recognise it when we see it. And it's amazing, by the time you get to page 1 or 2, when you're reading these, you think, this is refreshing, this is new, this is a quality proposal. Or you skim through it and you see it's skimpy, or it's verbose, or it's poorly structured, or it's amazing how diffuse that concept is and how difficult to define, but it's very easy to recognise. Number 7, the significance of the project is terribly important, advancing knowledge. Okay, now, although the book says that we're supposed to judge the quality of the proposal, we do also judge the quality of the researcher, because we want to be sure that the money we spend is used by people who know how to do research and are likely to bring it to a fruitful outcome. So we look at the reputation of the researcher, and there are little boxes that the assessors are supposed to tick, whether they're in the top 2% or in their field or wherever they are. And then the bottom category is unknown. And it's really disheartening when you're a young new researcher and you get back all these unknowns. It's even worse if you think you're a high-profile researcher and people tick the boxes unknown. So we look at what you've done, and we do that by looking at what you've done over the last 5 years. Now, it's very difficult to demonstrate productivity when you're starting in a new area. And we all look at the publications, what have they done for the last 5 years, and we really take that into account an awful lot, because we call it track record. Now, when we say productivity, we don't mean conference papers, although we look at that. We really mean refereed journal articles, and preferably refereed journal articles in international journals. The other thing that is important is you get to nominate two assessors, and you have to give reasons as to why you nominate them. And we look at them and we see who you've nominated, and then we nominate some too. We really like you to pick people who we know are authorities in the field that you're wanting to. You do a lot of good to yourself if you can demonstrate that you believe you can use referees of international standing, certainly of national standing. It's pretty obvious when you use your mates, and in fact we have rules to try and stop you using your mates. You're not allowed to use your supervisor, which is problematic. You're not allowed to use anyone in your own university, which is problematic because they probably know you. Well, you're not allowed to use anyone that you've ever collaborated with or written with in the last 5 years. Number 4 is terribly important now, past record of completion. We actually look to see what you did with the previous money we've given you. We actually grade your final report to see if you satisfied your aims and objectives, and to see what conference papers you gave and what you wrote. Now that is problematic too, because in some fields, and I've done this myself, I haven't written a decent book till after 3 years after I've finished the project. In fact, I've even got one that's gone on longer than that. So you're so immersed with gathering your data and analysing it and coming to terms with everything that you do a not terribly brilliant final report. You've certainly given conference papers, but you've got journal articles coming out, but some of them aren't due to appear, even though they've been accepted. And your book you don't do till 2 or 3 years later, and that doesn't go in. So we're trying to address that too. But this is very important now with these outcomes. And then number 5, perception of competence and originality. There needs to be a perception of competence, but you've got to be more than competent. It's almost as if the word competent is mediocre, competent. You've got to be original and or whatever.